Next item, please.
Next item is monitoring student learning, Dr. Glenn Maleko, Ms. Fatmi Faraj, and Dr. Dan Patterson.
Ms. Faraj and Dr. Patterson will be
react
entering
more
now.
quickly if we.
Okay, I see them. I'll turn it over to Ms. Faraj and Dr. Patterson.
Evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Okay, so today's presentation, I want to minimize the presenters and start presenting. So today's presentation is monitoring student learning and strategic plan update. If we remember, we had our wonderful board approved our strategic plan last year around this time, and thank you for that. And we started implementation in winter of 2020. You've heard Dr. Mead earlier in the meeting on so many comments, really summarizing what our strategic plan is and what strategic planning means. So I recommend that Dr. Mead becomes a consultant after he retires from this position. He does a wonderful job with that. So with our strategic plan, really, it's a roadmap, like we've heard tonight. It's a roadmap that would define what our vision, mission, and goals are, and it really defines how we use funding to spend on activities and strategies that support this plan. I personally want to thank this board for really taking that as one of the utmost important actions that would drive our practices in our school. And I want to thank Dr. Maleko for really focusing our efforts in whatever it is that we're doing on our strategic plan. And I am humbled and I feel privileged that I oversee this process in the district. So the roadmap for creating the current strategic plan, after we have, the timeline has ended with a former one. It was from 2016 to 2018 when the first strategic plan was implemented. And from 2018 to 2019, we started developing the second strategic plan. And we did what is called the Swa Analysis, which is looking at our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. We had community input, we hired consultants, we had a committee of 70 stakeholders from different groups in the community, parents, students, teachers, administrators, community influencers from the political arena, from different places, board members. So we had different representation on the strategic plan. The board approved it around this time last year. I believe it was in November, and then implementation started in 2020. The timeline is really, and based on the Michigan Leadership Institute and the consultants that supported us in this process, a good strategic plan would be running about 3 years, and then we would renew our goals and strategies. One of the things that remained the same with our current strategic plan from the formal one is the vision. In the community survey that we sent out, we asked our stakeholders if they would like to keep our vision because it was branded. We use it often. Students are familiar with it, staff are familiar with it, and which is student first, what you see on the background of all our documents and everything that we do. With our current strategic plan, what we did is we tried as much as we can, and you hear us, you see it in our documents, you hear Dr. Maleko emphasizing that we tie our daily practices, whether it's in the classroom, at the building level, at the district level, to our focus areas, goals, and strategies. We came up with and really narrowed it down. In a strategic plan, it should be comprehensive, yet not too spelled out where it includes all the activities that we do on a daily basis. So what we did is we narrowed it down to 4 focus areas, and that again came from the stakeholders committee. These are big major areas that we selected. Under each of the focus area, we had 3 measurable goals. And for each of the goals, we had 2 to 4 strategies. So one of the things you will notice when you go to each one of them, you're going to find a spelled out measurable goal, and then the strategies that our buildings and teachers are using in their classrooms on a day-to-day basis. How do we progress toward the goals and how do we measure that? I wanted to remind our community and our trustees today of what we've created for this process. We did create a one-pager as part of the process. I'm going to click on it and show you. This is very helpful where it sums up what our district is about in numbers. And then on the bottom half of this page, you will see that we have the focus areas, each of the goals spelled out, and then the strategies. The top portion is really a summary of what our district is about, how many students, percentages of the subgroups, highlights and awards that we've received, and other areas that are included in the plan as well. Now, if we need to look at our strategic plan, it is on our webpage. Mr. Troy Patterson helped us create the webpage, and we have it. If you click on the link and you would go, you will see the stakeholders who participated in creating the plan on this page. And you will also see, this is the committee right here. If we expand with a plus sign, it will give you all the names. And also for each of the focus areas, like for example, teaching and learning, we have 3 different goals. By expanding each goal, it gives you the strategies. And then how do we measure and monitor that? We have a SMART goal and milestones focus area for each of them. So if you click on it, you will see how we keep track of our data to make sure that we are following what we said we will follow, and we assess whether we are on the right track or not. We do have qualitative and quantitative data in each of those measurable sheets or metrics. On top, we have the numbers. We said we were going to use state assessments to measure the first goal. So here are the numbers, and we keep track of them. And here are the actions under the specific strategies that we said we were going to implement for each of the goals. So if you scroll down, you will see that we meet frequently and we assess whether we are implementing the actions and strategies we have spelled out in our plan. So that's just one example of how we monitor one of the goals. If you go to each of the goals, you will see the same thing. I just wanted to remind everyone where they can find, and it's transparent for the community. For some of the data, because of the COVID, when state assessments were not administered, you will not find numbers, but you will find the milestones for that goal. Going back to the strategic plan page, and as we said, we wanted to be very transparent with the community and with all the stakeholders. All the surveys that we administer moving forward will also be on that page. For example, last year, we administered a staff survey for climate culture. The results of that survey are linked here on this page. If you click on it, you will see the survey results are analyzed. We have determined what the survey data told us about our strengths as a district and our opportunities for improvements. So just wanted to point out this information as we present the update. Any questions about that before we move on to how we monitor the progress of learning while we are in the pandemic?
I can just mention Ms. Farage, and thank you for she's done a great job with everyone leading. And this next portion is part of some of the board requests that have come up at the meeting too. So it kind of encompasses some of that data that we've had requests to look at the data from previous board meetings. And I've spoken to President Barry about this as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Patterson is going to present the student progress in terms of student learning. Next.
Thank you, Mrs. Farage. So I'm going to share some data that we have on how our students have been progressing since the shutdown last spring. And although we know that there has been numerous challenges throughout this pandemic that we've been experiencing, I just wanted to take a minute and highlight a few of the highlights that have been brought forth by some of our administrators. So we asked our administrators a few weeks ago to list some positive outcomes that they've seen with our shift to remote learning and some of the new tools that we've been doing. And they've listed them for both staff, students, and parents. So just to highlight a few, there's many more that we collected as well that we can share with you. Across the board, everyone is learning much, much more about technology. Staff, students, and parents have been given access to many new tools. For the staff, it's been beneficial to actually have different opportunities for PD. Before, trying to get everyone in a single room with the presenter or co-presenters has always been challenging. Now that we've been becoming a little more proficient with being able to do Zoom meetings, also being able to record them and post them for people to see them later, that's been very beneficial. The students have been learning new software. They've been advocating for themselves to make sure that they come in to get extra help when they need it and communicating with their teachers. And parents have also become much more of a partner in their child's education since they're much more intimately involved with it on a daily basis. And we've also opened up a lot of new avenues for two-way communication with parents as well. So although we know there's been a lot of challenges, these are a few things that people have highlighted as some of the positive outcomes of some of the changes that we've been doing. Okay, if we could look at the next slide. So, I'm going to share with you to show how our students have been progressing, but I'd first just like to highlight that we very much believe in a multiple measures approach in our district. I know that we have given several presentations over the years on our school improvement process, where we take a look at demographic, achievement, process, and perception data. We definitely believe that a single measure shouldn't be the only thing that we're taking a look at. And that's the same thing that we're doing right now with our COVID situation. We're looking at many different metrics to make sure we're making informed decisions. So some of the achievement data that our schools have been collecting at the school level, teachers are progress monitoring, which means that they're collecting information on a daily, weekly basis on their students to see how they're progressing. We give a reading assessment called the DRA. Schools are giving common assessments, and we're also going to look at some grade data tonight. At the district level, we give the NWE assessment from K through 8. And then at the state level, we give all of the state standardized assessments. Most of these we do not have, I should say all of these we do not have data for from last spring, but we do have some SAT data from the fall. So the first thing that I'll be sharing with you is our high school SAT data. So what I'm showing you here is the data from our students that took these high school assessments or 2 months ago in October. The first thing I'd like to point out in the box in the upper right is how many students came in to take these exams. All state testing was canceled last spring. So the state of Michigan provided these assessments free of charge for students, and these were all given on a voluntary basis. So students did not have to come in if they didn't feel like it was a good opportunity for them. But we had a good turnout, I would say, for all of the grades. And you can see that we had almost 750 of our seniors come in to take those exams. So on the bottom, the left four groups of bars are for our reading data, English language arts. It's abbreviated evidence-based reading and writing for the PSAT. And what I have up here is data from our district and the state. And for the students that came and took the exams, we feel like they did very well. These averages are a little bit higher than we typically see with spring testing, and compared to the state averages, we're pleased with what we saw, and we were happy that the students were able to come in and take those exams because they felt that they were beneficial to them. The one thing I do want to point out, though, is that we do just want to be careful. This is not a representative group of our students, so we don't really want to look at this longitudinally with how we've done in the past. But one thing I do want to definitely say is I do want to definitely give some recognition to our high school testing coordinators, Jeff Del Judish, Marwan Salami, and Craig Kiefer. They worked tirelessly to make sure that we were able to get all of these students in a safe, socially distanced way, to make sure that they felt safe, our teachers felt safe, and our entire high school staff showed up on these days to make sure that these students could take these exams. So everybody coordinated this very well, and we're very happy with how the results went. Okay, and next I'm going to share our NWEA data. So NWEA is an assessment that we have been giving for about 5 or 6 years now, and we give it 3 times a year in grades K through 8. And this is really the one piece of data that we have that kind of shows longitudinally pre-COVID and post-COVID the impact on our students. So the key takeaway before I break this graph down to you is that we did see some learning loss in our students, which we anticipated. When students are out of school for several months and then we're coming back with some new tools and a new platform, it's something that we anticipated. It's something that we've seen across the nation. But this is the one piece of longitudinal data that I think kind of captures a little bit of that. So the way that NWEA works is when a student takes a test based on their score, the system will tell them what would be average growth that similar students with that same score would make for the next administration of the test. And they always pick the average growth that a student will make. And just based on the way that averages work, about half of the students make that growth and half of them don't, which is why I have this 50% dotted line across it, because typically we expect half to be above their growth and about half to be below. In previous years, our students have been, above average in their growth. And we're looking at growth here from fall of one year to fall of the next year. So a full year, including summer. For each of these grade groups from 1 through 8, you can notice that the darkest bar on the right is for the most part lower. And that is the fall growth from last fall of 2019 to this fall of 2020. And we did actually have over 96% of our K through 8 students take this NWEA data. One thing though that I would like to mention is we did anticipate to see slightly less growth because of the students' shortened school year last year. But we also gave the assessment this fall in a much different manner. The majority of our students took this test at home. And so it's gonna look differently than had they been in school taking the test. So we always wanna interpret the data with a grain of salt, but this is some longitudinal data we have. It's really the only data we have last year and this year that kind of captures some of the growth of our students. So we did notice a little bit of decline in reading and math from fall to fall. So this is the reading data. And then if you take a look at the next slide for the math data, it looks a little bit similar, where this year's growth is slightly below the past. And one note that I do just want to make, I do have a note up there saying that we had a changing in testing policy that makes the 3rd grade data look a little different. what that means is that in second grade, that is a very important year for students. It's the time in their educational careers where most of them go from learning how to read to reading to learn. And so at second grade, NWA actually has two assessments that we can give. One is read to the student, and the other one, the student reads on their own. And last year we made a transition to where in second grade, all students took the test that they read to themselves. And because of that, it makes it a similar test in third grade. So having seen the test 2 years in a row, that growth looks a little bit better just because of that consistency in testing. The prior year, they took a test that was read to them, and then in third grade took one that they had to read on their own. And because of that change in dynamic, we often see a little bit of drop just because of the mode of testing. But I just want to explain why the third grade data looks a little different. Okay, and then the last bit of data we have to take a look at is some grade data from our first marking period. And so what this is showing is over the last 3 years, in the first 9 weeks of school, how many grades were given, A, Bs, C, Ds, or Es. And as we can see in 2019, 2020, we had about 4% of our students receiving E, and it was pretty consistent, actually, pretty much the same for both of those years. 2020, roughly the same number of A's and B's, about the same for C's, but we did notice a slight increase in the number of E's that were given. And we knew that we were going to see some students struggling with the change in the mode of instruction, doing some more work independently. So this is something that we did anticipate. And not to downplay the number of, the increase in E's, but we do see that the vast majority of our students are still, doing well despite all of the changes that have occurred in, their educational setting. And this data is actually more like a formative assessment data because quarter grades do not go on a student's transcripts. And all of our schools and principals have been looking at this data ever since the marking period has come. And the schools have been adapting, and all of them have updated all of their intervention plans. I know at the district level, we've added another layer of student support to make sure that all of the students that have been struggling a little bit to be successful are going to get the support they need. And I know that all of our principals feel like by the time the semester comes around in the beginning of January, we'll see those numbers decrease quite a bit. And I should just say that these numbers are based on how many grades we are given. So we have about 1,500 students at each grade level. Each of them are in 6 classes. So this is based on the number of students times those 6 grades that they receive. And then if we can take a look at the next slide, this is the same data, but for high school. And here we can see similar trends that we saw in middle school. The number of A's and B's roughly stayed the same. We did have an increase in the number of E's, but again, this is something that the district's been incredibly responsive to, and all of our schools have response plans in place to make sure that all the students that need the help and intervention that they need will get it. So to kind of summarize what we've taken a look at so far is we anticipated that there would be some learning loss and that we'd have some students struggling with remote learning. But at the same time, we're seeing many, many successes along the way. And most of our students are doing well despite the challenging circumstances that we're seeing. And all of our schools have been improving upon their support plans and revising those to meet all of the students' needs. And everyone has been establishing better and more consistent routines by going through all of these changes together and learning from them.
Just wanted to add to what Dr. Patterson said about NWA is that nationwide, an increase in score has been noted, and the average with NWEA has been brought down because of that. Again, the state MDE did require the benchmark assessment with NWEA this year, but they have warned against comparing schools to school, school to school, and also district to district. What we are required to do this year is to post aggregate data, meaning the entire district average, and report that to MDE so that they can measure learning loss and create an action plan statewide based on this decrease in improvement, because this is noted nationwide. I wanted to add this piece of data so that we are aware of. Also, as we scramble to build our knowledge as teachers, I really wanted to applaud our teachers for being very creative and taking on the knowledge and the different strategies to engage our students. And we do see the improvement through qualitative data and through surveys uh, reported by our teaching staff and also hearing from our parents and students. They are developing consistency as we move along. And we are seeing progress even in the pandemic learning. I wanted to make that.
Dr. Patterson, if I can comment too on the data that you showed with the grade distribution, I know that we talked, although we knew it was going to be a couple of things, it was going to be a little more challenging as far as the grades go. Bottom line is that we know we have to reach out to some different students in different ways, but the majority of students are being successful given all the changes, and that was such a high percentage. If you take, I don't know if we could go back to your slide on the numbers where you talked about 6,000 students in the grades that are given. It's still a high percentage. There's a little there's a few extra students that are struggling because of the format which we've anticipated. We've also, as a district, and I want to comment on this, that we're working on something to make sure that no student, that we reach out to all students in different ways. And I got to tell you, the buildings are doing a great job. With the pandemic, we're in a tough situation because of the fact that we can't do the normal things that we would like to do with students in the schools or with parents coming into the schools, working with the teachers. But there's other ways to do it. And I've seen some great things of the teachers involved. However, it also goes to the whole school district, and we're working on a plan. The principals and the teachers, they reach out to students if students aren't showing up to classes, because the issue we have right here is that the environment students are in, we don't necessarily control the schedules and things. We try to really we have to work with parents and support, but we know when we're with some students, and some students are dealing with different challenges in the home even, or just some for some students that might be just getting that into that routine. So we're working on something, and this is where Dearborn Schools comes together. And I just want to mention, so for those students that, and again, I'm going to say it's a smaller percentage, because if you look at the high percentage, they're doing well given the circumstances. We have a program that we're implementing. We're meeting with administration, Mr. Saley, Dr. Violet Sweden, myself, and we have, for example, the transportation department, we have noon hour supervisors, and we have others. And again, the schools are already reaching out to students when maybe a student checked out in this virtual environment and we haven't heard from them. Well, we're reaching out, we have communications. We're also coming up with a new process that we're going to all work together. Right now, we don't have a lot of transportation. But what we can do is, and we're getting volunteers, and we're working with Mr. Larini of the union. We appreciate it in HR. And so we're going to use those resources from the staff, even in the non-instructional, and some of them are getting trained, and they're going to be doing a couple of things. One is going to be making phone calls as an extra layer to check in and to get them redirected back to school. The second is, if needed, they will actually be driving into the neighborhoods in a safe manner. I want to mention the COVID, and no one's going to be entering houses, but we will, help to provide support and just reaching out to students. So we're going to have transportation involved, noon hours. We're going to put everyone together. One of the things the state has said, and I worked with Mr. Wall, we're trying to limit as many layoffs as we can. And legally, we have to have people, put the people to work. If you can't work from home, even though the governor's working, is moving in the direction of work from home as much as possible. So this is another thing we're putting together. we're working together where we're going to actually have extra reach out that's going to support what the buildings are doing, because the teachers are working so hard. We know the principals are, and everyone is. And so this is going to be an extra layer of support, just to reach out. In my career as both the principal, and you might remember the board, the home visit program that we've implemented, we can't do that as in depth. But one thing that we can do is really show how Dearborn Schools cares. And if it comes down to it, you may even see buses driving through the neighborhood again, which would be nice, wouldn't it? Since we've kind of had to go online learning. So I just wanted to mention that we're going to, so that percentage where you see between, maybe the 8% to now that 6%, or that number of students that we haven't heard from as much, or may not be checking into class, we're going to be doing extra things to reach out to them, and we'll continue to do that. I also want to take the opportunity to comment on the learning loss. The board, we've talked about learning loss, and when I speak of that, and we've looked at data I've presented before you with the summer learning loss. And so this brings up that other conversation, and obviously in a COVID. So when we look at that, those are the kind of things with our NWA. It also kind of is a testament, I think, to the great instruction our teachers do, because the truth is, and we all know, the learning was interrupted in March. And so in the spring, we knew that we were going to be behind as students came back, because it just wasn't the same. And no school district was prepared for the same kind of instruction. Now in the fall, we have a different plan. It's much closer to what we would have normally operated, given the fact that we're online. It's a much closer process. However, and I've talked to trustees about this. I know Trustee Petlichkoff, Trustee McDonald. We are also in our cabinet looking at a discussion as to when we are out of this pandemic and when we can come back to some normalcy, what other things can we do to get our students caught up? So it's not just Dearborn Schools. I think we are going to be ahead, and we're going to meet the needs of our students, and we do. And I think that's what the data shows. But we're also being transparent that we know this is national and state, that because of the pandemic, and what happened, especially when it was almost stopped and halted in March, that there will be some learning loss. And we've seen that through summer and other data that we've seen, when the students leave in a normal year in June and come back in September, there potentially is some learning loss. So we've seen that. So I think these are all data sets. I appreciate the great work Ms. Farage has done and Dr. Patterson, but I just want to frame that as well, that, there's a lot of good and a lot of things that are working, and I see it, and I think the data shows that, but we have to be realistic with what we're in. So to expect that we're going to have every student at the same level if they were in person is not necessarily where we're at, but we're going to reach out and do those extra things that I just said to make sure that we can find those students, talk to the students, get them on track with teachers. We call that, doing whatever it takes to go above and beyond. And Ms. Farage, can you just comment on, I know I've had this comment just on the pacing. So right now, as far as the curriculum pacing and things compared to a normal school year, I mean, it was different in the spring, but right now, we have had to modify because of online, but we're basically still moving forward with our curriculum as mandated by the state. Do you have any comments on that?
And what Dr. Maleko just described about the plan, the action plan that we put together was shared in board briefs last week. So if you look, you will find individual building action plan based on the description that you just heard from Dr. Maleko. In terms of pacing of the curriculum, we know that the curriculum is cumbersome and it takes 6 hours a day, 180 days a year to teach the curriculum that we're supposed to teach. So what we did, as well as other districts and also nationwide, best practice says to reduce the number of standards to the essential standards that we're teaching in the classrooms. Instead of following the pacing page by page based on what we've done in previous years, we made sure that we picked the most essential standards, and these are the ones that are almost guaranteed that every child should learn in order to progress to the next grade level and be able to function at the next grade level. These are the essentials that we are focusing on. Having said that, we have to also look at our assessment and make sure that our assessments reflect those essentials when we assess the students. We're not going to take all the standards required by the state and create assessments, because there's no way we can cover them in the amount of time that we are teaching. So there are times when we have to tweak assessments, for example, common assessment in the district. We have to, instead of giving end of the unit assessment, that is very cumbersome and the time will not allow for that. We take the most essentials and make sure that are reflected on the assessment. We did part of the action plans that we've gone through is at the secondary level is to look at our schedule. And when we looked at the A's, the distribution of A, B, C, D grades, we found that students at the average and below average level are the ones who dropped in grades. And again, looking at that, creating the action plan that Dr. Maliko described, and also tweaking our schedule to make sure that the students are having more interaction with the teachers, where the teachers can scaffold their learning through face-to-face. I know it's Zoom, it's synchronous, but still, when they are attending every class and they're having interaction with the teachers, where the teacher can support them. That's been reported by the administrators across the district that it's been very helpful to the students. We made this change in middle school. It's already in place in elementary, and we are looking at that at the high school level. So these are what you see on the screen are comments from middle school administrators looking at the advantages of switching to the 6 Zoom sessions. They're not 6 hour Zoom sessions, they are 40 minutes Zoom sessions. And students are given breaks in between and making sure that they are in breakout rooms, interacting with teachers and peers. And there are often co-teachers teaching in the same rooms when it allows for that. We don't have a co-teacher with every teacher, but we do have support staff in different buildings supporting, so they would push in and support the teacher and the students. So again, tweaking the assessments to match the essential standards, tweaking the curriculum, creating action plans that are very detailed, looking at which students are are not progressing the way they should be, and providing small group instruction for those students, whether it's within the Zoom session, the regular hour, or during learning labs. When learning labs are not in person, we are doing virtual learning labs. Teachers still meet with students virtually. So we're doing whatever it takes, and you've heard that bus drivers will be involved, special ed staff, bilingual staff. It takes a whole community, and we are doing it. I think the parents are doing a wonderful job as well. There is far more parent involvement than what we've seen in the past. We've seen a lot of challenges, yeah. From that came a lot of opportunities, whether it's about our own learning, the student learning, or the parents learning. I think we're going through this. We're learning a lot as we go along.
If I can add too, Fatmi, to your comment on the parents, we appreciate the parents and what they're doing because they really are stepping up in a lot of ways, working with the teachers, and we thank them. So, if we're looking at, for example, 6,000 grades at high school, we're looking at over 3,840 grades that are A's or B's. And at the middle school, out of 4,500, 3,150 that are A's or B's. So if you look at that number, the parents are helping out with that to make sure. And then we appreciate the students that are maintaining that and taking, the importance of online learning and understanding that it is different, but it is still very important to their schooling and really to their future moving forward. So thank you. Thank you again to the parents.
Dr. Maliko, thank you very much for that report. Mrs. Footage and Dr. Pedersen, we appreciate all the work that went into this report. I can tell, it's a lot of work. I know there was Trustee McDonald and there was others who were very concerned at the last meeting about the failure rates. I think by looking at this grade distribution graph, for me, it kind of opened up my eyes that, yeah, there's some loss, but it's manageable. And I think that our teachers and our administrators and your leadership, Dr. Maliko, I feel confident that, yeah, we're going to get caught up, no doubt in my mind. There's one thing I want to throw into here. We keep, I think we're being too hard on ourselves about, we can't just blame the learning loss just on, being, virtual. Because I was looking at a couple articles this morning, even the in-person districts are showing loss because of the COVID trauma. Families are being affected, daily now more than ever. But there's also going to be nobody's paying attention to that right now. But there's also going to be reports that yes, of course, there was learning loss for districts that had the in-person teaching. So, to my colleagues, are there any questions about this report?
I would just like to comment.
Please, Trustee Lane.
I feel like that humanity just took a great test with COVID, with the whole reaction to the pandemic, and we're still getting the results of our test back. We'll be getting those results back in the next 6 months or year, and we'll see whether we live up to our test. We have a big test coming up in the next holidays, and everybody needs to try to be as careful as possible to not spread the infection any further. But I agree with you, President Barry. We can't thank our teachers enough. We can't thank our parents enough. Everybody, our staff lived up to and stepped up to the challenges. If we didn't think that there was going to be learning loss, we weren't thinking. We see it every place in the news, and it's not just Dearborn, it's not just Michigan. We have suffered, all of us as people, a great trauma. Our life was just like blown up, and now we have to adapt to that. So of course there's going to be learning loss, but there's new things that we've learned. Parents have learned a lot more about their kids. We've all learned a lot more technology, but there are some people being lost along the way, and we will need in the 2021-2022 school year, we're going to need to have to bring those people back in. So I hope that parents and teachers will not be stressing themselves too much, even students, about what they haven't learned. They have to focus on what we have learned, and we've gotten through this so far. Let's just hope we can buckle down and get through it for the rest of the year, because there is hope on the horizon. One thing on the slides, the first slide mentioned that it was the first strategic plan. It's not the first strategic plan that Dearborn ever had. I think it might be the first one that under Dr. Maleko, but Dr. Artis also had a strategic plan. So, a minor point, but don't want to let it go by. Thank you, Dr. Patterson, Ms. Farage, and Dr. Maleko.
Thank you, Trustee Lane, for bringing that up. I know Trustee Petrikov has brought it up a couple of times. I brought up the subject early on when we started tackling this challenge, but I know that Dr. Maleko and his team is working on it, but we will be ready. We have to be ready when we get back into the classrooms, post-COVID, with some high-intensity tutoring. We need to be prepared with some after-school programs, summer school, and I know those discussions are happening, but obviously just a matter of time before we start talking about the remediation. And I know Trustee Petrikov wants to make a comment, but Dr. Maleko, I know that some of the districts where, how do I put this, well, just go ahead and say it, I guess, where families are more affluent, have resources, they are currently right now, having some extra tutoring, even if it's online, virtual, for their students, and that's paying up big dividends. Do we have like some kind of grant money or money set aside where we can start doing some of that? If we're not doing it already, I don't know. So if you can share your thoughts on that.
I mean, we can always use our Title I, and the state is always looking at different funding. There's some smaller grants that are available, not necessarily just for tutoring, but also for interventions. And I know Ms. Rose Aldubailey and Mr. Asali have been in some conversations with some community groups about that, maybe providing some of that additional support. As far as summer school, yes, we need to look at that. I also would say that some of our staff allocations of interventionists, coaches, and things that get the students, even in a virtual environment, down to small numbers of students are also critical. So we've allocated a lot into teaching staff that have that expertise. And that may be during the day, but it's extra doses of intervention for the students. And I've actually gone into some of those classes virtually right now. Once we get back in person, we can ramp up, the intervention coach model, our early childhood specialist model, all those things to provide that extra support. And then we will continue. And I've talked to our team about, looking at options, moving forward that you just suggested. And of course, we're going to always look for grant funding. I don't remember all the grants, but I know the state has offered some grants. Dr. Patterson has been involved in going for some of that. Mr. Asali, Ms. Faraj, they've been involved. I have not heard of high levels of grants for learning loss and other things yet that have come from the state or the feds, but we can reallocate our current monies for Title I and other things to provide those interventions for students.
Yeah.
Trustee Petrikov?
For the time, I just wanted to add to what Dr. Maleko said, because we didn't want the students to stay virtual longer than the school day. Currently, we're not doing after school tutoring, but for summer schools, we already have plans in place. And interventions are taking place during the school day, as Dr. Maleko mentioned.
Okay, I have several questions / comments kind of thing. One, I would just be curious if Dr. Patterson has heard, because I know that this is a nationwide issue, probably it's a worldwide issue of learning loss right now with the disruption of the traditional educational school day for the kids. We chose from the get-go to not flip-flop back and forth with in-person for a couple weeks and then having to go online kind of thing. And I noticed that in some of the commentary that was shown to us that people were getting into the routine and were starting to figure out how to do this. And I suspect that it may have affected the ability, and it was always my supposition that if we stuck with a mode of education rather than going back and forth, it would be less confusing and they would get into the routine, even if it was so different from what they were used to and so unfamiliar. So I would be curious to see, though, if we would ever get any data, I don't know if it'll ever be shown, of those districts that kind of mishmashed it up, whether it helped us or hurt us in case we're ever confronted with something, God forbid, like this again. Number two, so that's just a statement. I don't expect you to have an answer to that. Number two, hopefully by springtime, we will be back in the classroom. And I was curious about how are we going to transition then from where we're not pacing and we're just taking out those things that we think are critical right now. Once we get back to the routine of 5 days a week, a full school day back in the classroom, how are we going to get back to the normal again with and pick, because I'm assuming we can't just pick up where we left off in the virtual world. My guess would be we're going to try to cobble something together that would be more to the pacing of the traditional students' curriculum at that point in time. But I'm not certain, are we prepared for that if that were to come sooner rather than later?
Yes, we are prepared for that. What I mentioned is called the essential standards, and the essential standards are almost like guaranteed essentials, meaning that we need to guarantee that every student learns these and
right.
move to the rest of the standards. Our teachers are meeting in what we call professional learning communities, and what they do is they pace the curriculum and the standards when they meet, and they make sure that they cover those standards during their daily instruction. So that's really the work that they do on a regular basis, whether they're in the building or whether we are on the district level meeting with principals. That's the bulk of our work. That's what we continue to do all the time. So yeah, they will transition to pacing the curriculum and making sure they are what they did at the end of actually at the beginning of this year. What they did is they went back to last year's grade levels, and what they did is they highlighted what they missed because of the pandemic, so that they can pick up on those early this fall. So our teachers are well aware. They do a wonderful job with the pacing and making sure that the standards are covered with the students. And again, they would narrow and expand based on the time given and based on what the pandemic is allowing us to do. And what we call remediation is like Mr. Berry mentioned, remediation is taking extra time after school in the summer to cover those essentials that we have missed. So remediation will happen afterwards. And
Okay.
some of it is happening now, actually, with a new middle school schedule. We have created a plan where teachers are teaching for 20 minutes and then breaking into smaller groups. And those who are average and above, they would continue the learning, whether on their own or with the help of an adult, while the teacher is reteaching that standard to the students who are average and below. Because they did not pick it up within the first 20 minutes, they would reteach it to them for the 15 minutes, and then they would go.
And my last question would be, are we doing, since you're saying that there are, Dr. Malekos, some students who just kind of dropped out of sight, so to speak. And I don't know how many of those. I'm sure it's not a huge number. I'm hoping it's not a huge number who have just kind of stopped participating. Are truancy laws still in effect here? I mean, are we going to be held accountable for those students who just kind of stopped checking in?
Yeah, they're still in effect. Trustee Petlicoff, I could comment. We just actually discussed this at the meeting last week with Mr. Abe Mashur, who's been part of the conversation of reaching out and with our community and services. So they're still in play, but obviously we try to, and the schools are still implementing it if needed. And Mr. Mashur from Student Services heads that up. But it isn't a huge number, like you said. But we just want to make sure we reach out to any student that may have checked out. I can tell you a positive situation where there was a student that Dr. Swiden, they couldn't find the student from one of the high schools and was not showing up, and so there were calls that were made, and this is just one example. Calls that were made, and the parent in the household was asking for some help, and they had some meetings, and now all of a sudden, guess what? There was some conversation between the parent, the school's social worker, Dr. Swiden, and the student, and now the student's been showing up. It's been a success story. So they're just one example, but that's sometimes that extra reach out to that small percentage. Right. And so with the truancy, we use it very infrequently. We use it when we need to, but it still is in play if necessary, as one of the tools that we would use. But at the same token, for students that just totally disregard and checked out, we'd be doing a lot of checks and a lot of calls and a lot of things before we would, get to that point.
Yeah, I just want the community to understand we're just not disregarding kids who just decided, I don't want to bother with it, kind of attitude.
Mr. Mashur uses a tracking form for that. He has each building track the students and making sure they know where they are. Whether
okay, great.
Or not, we should know where
yeah, yeah. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Trustee Thorpe, do you have a question?
Yes, and I apologize if you already mentioned this when you were going through it, I didn't hear. When we're talking about the students that have had failing grades thus far, are we attributing it to that there's more students that are having a problem, or the students that might have had a problem with one class in the past, maybe now it's two classes that they're struggling in?
I'll defer. I don't know if Dr. Patterson is still there because he looked at that data.
Yes, it's a little bit of both of those situations. I tried to take a look to see how many students might have had more E's this year than they did last year. We do have a number that is in that case as well. And then we also have some students that that hadn't had any before that did have any this year. And in a few of your classes, there wasn't actually a single case. And I think that's just because of the dynamic nature of everything that's going on. You know, students are in such individualized situations that there really wasn't one necessarily root cause to all of it. It's just kind of a dynamic situation and kids are experiencing it differently.
Any other questions?
I'd like to ask Dr. Patterson about the AP tests. I was astonished actually when less than 2 months into the pandemic, the AP tests were actually conducted. I never imagined that students would be tested then. At that point, we were all just getting used to everything that was happening. So I don't know whether you've gotten the results, and that group is kind of a unique group because it's really high achieving group. And if they can't succeed, then I'm really concerned that online isn't delivering for lots of people. But do you know, what are they expecting for the AP tests this spring, Dr. Patterson?
For this spring, we're still kind of waiting to see how schooling is going to look. I mean, last year they did look quite differently, which does make kind of comparing student progress from previous years much different, because versus taking a sit down paper and pencil test with some multiple choice questions, they were much more free response essays. So
presumably that means that the students didn't do as well.
No, we actually had fairly good results this year based on our previous results as well, even though the format was different. And that's something I can provide in a board brief to you in the future. So in terms of this year, I know that they have both of those modes available now. It's just depending to see on if we are in class and able to administer those. And as of right now, the state is required to administer our state test in the spring, and we're working on plans to try to make sure we can logistically do that. But I think we're still hoping that there might be some leeway in that based on where we are.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much. It was a great discussion, a lot of information. We all appreciate it. Yes, Dr. Mead, of course. Yeah, those deserve a lot. Thank you.